That's very much appreciated, and we are collaborating already very closely on these issues. I need to pre-warn you that my neighbors have just started drilling holes in their walls, apparently right now. So if all of a sudden you can't hear me, that's most probably because of this. What I want to do is to give a short overview of the state of the marine environment, highlight a number of huge opportunity for Copernicus to support EU policies, and also discuss, there we go, and discuss, also present what the European Environment Agency is doing actually in cooperation. Okay, I'll try again. Okay, that's good too. Thanks for the message. Apparently you can still hear me. Okay, what I wanted to start saying is that the state of the marine environment, the reports we are doing show clearly that the marine environment is in poor status. We've shown this with our publication, Marine Messages 2, published in June last year. The implementation report of the European Commission also showed the same thing. We've been supporting that report as well. When you look at biodiversity, contaminants, eutrophication, or status of fish stocks, all of this is quite in poor status across Europe. What we see is that there is an implementation gap of EU policies across Europe, and the fact that almost no objectives have been reached in 2020 as planned, except the one on marine protected areas. Most of the other ones have not been reached. When we look at data behind this situation, we have a lack of timely delivery of data. Data is reaching us very late compared to the deadlines for reporting. There are many data gaps. There are quality issues as well. And this is most probably due to a large extent to insufficient monitoring in countries. On our platform, Wise Marine, we have developed a number of dashboards that you can access, and or you can also browse these data which have been reported. Obviously, the state of the marine environment is impacting the ecosystems and the services they provide, and this also includes a number of impacts on the maritime sectors, including prominently fisheries. The last point here on the state of affairs, let's say, is very much about the challenges we have in assessing the data on the marine environment. We can see that the data being reported by countries is based on methodologies which changes over time, and the methodologies and the approach to monitoring differs from country to country. So that certainly, these two items are certainly problems we have for assessing the state of the marine environment. Now, I move to discussing a number of opportunities for Copernicus to help in that situation. And in particular, I want to highlight the potential to support the reporting by member states under the different EU directives, and in particular the Marine Strategy Frame Directive. The type of products and data that Copernicus has the potential to allow all stakeholders, not only the European Environment Agency, to get data in a timely manner. Under the MSFD, as you know, we get data being reported every 6 years only. So we look at ocean observation, and Copernicus with a great potential to improve the availability of data in a timely manner. Then also the products and the data being collected and observation has the potential to solve the issues we have in terms of changing methodologies over time. The same with bringing some coherence on methodologies across borders, across space, because as I said before, countries follow different protocols to monitoring, and therefore we have issues in comparing or at least to have an assessment of the marine environment at European level. And then the last point, of course, is very much about the fact that we are very interested in having more near real-time data that would help us a lot in assessing the state of the marine environment. All these points really would strengthen the availability of data for all stakeholders, improving the ability to assess the state of the marine environment, and in fine, support the integrated management of the marine environment and of the economic activities acting at sea. So the link here is not only to the environment policies, of course, but the link is also to the integrated maritime policy with all the maritime sectors which are involved and that need to do a transition also to sustainability in the short and medium term. Finally, and then I have other points, but so these other points I can mention them in the panel discussion, but I would like to close by highlighting that at the European Environment Agency the last few years we've been collaborating closely with Copernicus Marine Service and Mercator Océan International. And I want to highlight a number of products that we've been using increasingly. First of all, the indicator on acidification has been a key improvement for our own indicator. We've been using the results of Copernicus activities. There is a need now to refine, I think, this indicator so that it's even more useful at regional and national level. When it comes to D5, the descriptors of the MSFD on eutrophication, we've been using some data on reduced oxygen content. When it comes to D7 on hydromorphological alterations, we've been using products from Copernicus on acidification, ocean heat content, sea surface temperature, and also Arctic and Baltic sea ice. So we are in the process of increasingly using products from Copernicus as we see that it's policy relevant. It brings the EU overview and facilitate our work for providing the assessment of the marine environment at EU level. We've been also using data which and products which link to extreme events. And that's also very important when we deal and address environmental issues, and in particular heat waves in the Mediterranean area. That's something we've been using out of the ocean monitoring indicators. The last point I want to mention, last but not least, this is in relation with the Ocean State Report that Karina mentioned before, the series of reports. We've been collaborating also and contributing to the edition number 4 with the introductory chapter providing an overview of the EU policies on the environment, but also on the maritime sectors, providing the policy context for all the work that Copernicus is undertaking, and also making sure or highlighting how this would link very closely to the objectives of the European Green Deal and the different strategies that that have been adopted under the European Green Deal. I am mentioning this introductory chapter because we believe it's very important that the products and the data from Copernicus are policy relevant, are close to the needs, the policy needs, and are also actionable data and knowledge that can lead to implementing solutions. As I said before, I will come back to these issues in the panel discussion, but I would like to stop for now, here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for this overview. We do not have a specific time. There are already questions coming up in the chat, so maybe you could you could have a look, and we have to continue, and maybe we can grab up them again in later in the roundtable Q&A, but maybe you can already reply first answer. So so I would then like to invite Albert Fischer from IUC UNESCO to present links to the International Ocean Reporting, the UN Decade, and the SDGs. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Karina. So I come from, in some ways, the upstream end of indicators in ocean state reporting in the observing system. But as you sit in the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, which deals also with the downstream end, the interface between science and policy, and so I'll try to bring both perspectives here. So this is a chart, just a bit of framing from the Sustainable Development Goals in a report that was written by a United Nations Environment Program in 2019, looking at whether we were making progress towards Sustainable Development Goals 1 through 17. And if we look at the ocean goal, the climate goal, which are closely related, there were some positive developments towards Sustainable Development Goals, a few negative. But the largest thing we could say, 68% of those indicators for the ocean, was that we had no data to be able to measure whether we were making progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So building the right data sets, building the right reports and indicators is really important to support policy processes, and of that information, we make environmental decisions and investment decisions based on assumptions and anecdotal evidence. So this is a view of, from the perspective of ocean observing, of a value chain that links observations, data management systems, analysis, and models, which is really the crux of what we're talking about here, and to applications. So the state report indicators are really important pivot points between observations and the assessment and policy processes. They go from, really, they are a translator of information, potential translator of information for policy processes. Those policy processes need that natural system information in a way that matches socioeconomic information. So I'll use the example from IPCC's Working Group 2 on vulnerability impacts and adaptation to show where our kind of information, whether it's blue from the blue ocean, the white ocean, the green ocean, comes in. So risk, climate risk, which is what policy processes are trying to minimize, comes from a combination of three factors. They come from the hazard, which is from the natural system. So for example, sea level rise and the projection of sea level rise and where it will be. It comes from vulnerability that can come from, for example, whether a country is rich or poor and has the investment ability or the knowledge to be able to adapt to climate change. And exposure, which just talks about simply what populations, what economic infrastructure is in that coastal zone that might be flooded by sea level rise. So the combination of those three factors is the climate risk. The policy processes are oriented towards reducing that risk. And so when we develop natural system reports around the hazards, natural system reports and indicators around the hazard, we have to think about and engage the policy processes to make sure that these are compatible with socioeconomic information that will be another strong part of the policy process. And this is one example from the IPCC focused on climate risk, but this is pretty typical of the conceptual frameworks in which indicators and science policy processes happen, whether that be for the large marine ecosystem processes under the Global Environmental Facility or UNEP's regional seas programs focused on pollution. So there are a lot of conceptual frameworks that are similar to this, and we have to engage with them going forward. Just a quick point on language. We often use in the science world, in the natural science world, we're talking about indicators when we're combining lots of different variables and to try to find a particular, highlight something about a particular phenomenon. And that is what the policy world would actually call an index, because an indicator has a target or has threshold in which a policy judgment or combined science and policy judgment has been made to identify some targets. So it has a slightly different meaning in the policy world that we should be aware of also. Just an example, an index is a physical quantity, like here we are, we have some scenarios of the extent of the warm pool under business as usual scenario going forward. And the indicator is some scientific or policy judgment related to that. So here's a few examples. Maybe the simplest example is just the global surface temperature and having a target of 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees as a threshold that which we shouldn't we shouldn't depass in the policy process. But there are some other examples which combine natural science information with some other knowledge as well, about different scenarios of corals at risk due to climate change, and the combined impact of human behavior from corals, from climate change, and from local impacts on ecosystems. These are just some example of indicators that combine these things. Switching topics a little bit, I wanted to come back to that, those two arrows where these indicators and state reports are kind of the point between observations and policy processes. We have an opportunity. We have just launched the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development on the 1st of January, and it will run for 10 years. So the group I'm working with, the Global Ocean Observing System, has submitted 3 program proposals, and I wanted to highlight one, which is around ocean observing co-design. We intend to work to build the processes, infrastructure, and tools for co-design of the observing system, really trying to create the ability to test the system, to challenge it, to make sure that we identify priority gaps from a policy perspective, from a major science question perspective as well, and match that evaluation, that assessment of the system in the future. And this is where, in fact, state reports and indicators can be an important framing for testing the observing system. Are we capturing major phenomena that are important for science and for society? So I'll finish up really just with my 2 key messages, which reflects that inflection point that these state reports and indicators represent. To build a dialogue downstream in the value chain between science and policy processes, making our natural system information compatible with socioeconomic and policy information so that they're really relevant to policy processes. And upstream, as I mentioned, this opportunity that these scientific indices and indicators can be valuable framings to evaluate the observing system and to improve it in the future. Thanks a lot.
Albert, thank you very much for this contribution. So also given that evolution on time, we have no time to further questions, and there's also no specific questions to your talk currently in the Q&A, but please have a look if they're coming up, and could you reply directly. So I would now like to share my screen so that we could start to work on the roundtable, and I hereby invite all participants to participate also with their video. So it's a roundtable on the EU reporting on ocean climate state and SDGs in the international landscape, and participation on this roundtable is moderation from Gattuso and myself. So participation is the European Environment Agency, Stéphane Isoard, ECMWF for Copernicus Climate Change Service, Samantha Burgess, GOOS IOC, Albert Fischer, you have just also heard the presentation, and we have the CNRS, Laboratoire Océanique de Villefranche, and also member of the CMEMS Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee, Jean-Pierre Gattuso. So I welcome you all to this roundtable. And so I would like to start with the very first question to all of you, and maybe you could, all of you, have a reply to this. A very general question. And my question is, how do you see the role of science, data, and services for decision-making and sustainable development, and how do environmental reporting such as the CMEMS framework can best contribute, and how do you have any specific recommendations for evolution? So maybe Stéphane, you could start if you want.
Thank you, Karina. And I'll answer in a very simple way, because I think we need, that European Environment Agency, we are a boundary organization. So we have one foot into the scientific world. We have tried to understand what is being done, and one foot into the policy support world. So obviously, when you're asking what is the role of science and data, it's critical, it's instrumental to make sure that we can support policy making, that we map the state of the environment, that we are able to map the pressures and the impacts of the state of the environment, but also indicate what could be possible responses. So that's absolutely critical. It's quite obvious. Now there are new, let's say, challenges which means that the research, but also the ocean observation and Copernicus products need to take into account in order to further support policy making. And the different objectives, of course, which came with the European Green Deal and the strategies, and which are embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals. What I mean in particular is what I mentioned before. It has to be more and more focused on actionable knowledge, and I want to come back to this because of the question in the chat. The technical questions on acidification, I'm actually not qualified to answer them. But what I want to mention is that when you look at the European Green Deal, when you look at the biodiversity strategy for 2030, or the Zero Pollution Action Plan, what is striking and different from before is that now we are talking about solution. It's not about mapping the state of the environment. It's about designing solutions, designing integrated solutions across the three pillars of sustainable development. So solutions which will take care of the socio-economic and environmental aspects. So the general question you ask, my answer to, at this point in time is, of course, we have to assess we have to use the results of research and data and science. The shift now is to support to a larger extent action and design of solutions, in addition to mapping the state of the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a specific reclarification. So one step forward would be to increase, because one of the issues is also to establish the information flow at those interfaces. And you were highlighting that you say that you have 1 foot in science and 1 foot in the policy world. So would be a continued and a strengthened collaboration with this activity and EEA all the way forward in order to increase the support from science and data and services for European policy.
Do you want me to come back on this?
Yeah, very quickly, just for final.
Yeah. I very much agree on this. I think actually there should be more regular cooperation and interaction between science in general, but also the working groups of the Commission of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive working groups with those providing updated data that can be used in the reporting of countries. So we have highlighted this before at member state level, at regional sea convention levels. I think more cooperation could be established so that there is regular contact and a better understanding of what are the products and data being offered by Copernicus, so that it can be picked up to a larger extent upstream, meaning way before countries need to be reporting data under these directives, so they can build in these products, and that they can increasingly save also on the burden that they have in monitoring the marine environment. Yeah, I'll stop here and let the others talk, and maybe I come back with some examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the contribution. So Samantha, also our part with the collaboration and also activities on reporting from the Climate Change Service. Also, how do you see the role of science data and services for decision making, sustainable development? How do environmental reporting, such as this presented framework here, can support this best, and for some recommendation for evolution?
Sure. So there was lots in that question, and firstly, I agree completely with what Stefan was discussing. I think there's two further elements that it's important to bear in mind at the moment. So we already heard from Albert the start of the ocean science decade, and I think many of us listening will remember the output and the benefits to marine science that the Census of Marine Life had a couple of decades ago. And so, you know, we have this real opportunity with this increased focus on science to not only increase our body of knowledge, but increase the use of that knowledge by decision makers. And I think the further point, and this is where services such as CMEMS and such as C3S have such a critical role, is that we deliver data, but we also convert that data into information and into knowledge. So it's not only vital to ensure the best available science is there for decision makers, but also that decision makers have the ability to understand what the implications of that science is for them, for building policies, for understanding the risk to that policy and for different policy decisions, and the exposure that they have for climate change, for ocean change in the future. And in terms of synergies between C3S and CMEMS, there are many synergies, and I guess I'll give three quick examples here. So first and foremost, many essential ocean variables are also essential climate variables. And in Copernicus 1, these were procured separately, but I think going forward, there are a lot of opportunities to increase these synergies so that we're procuring the same data from satellites, but delivering it for both a climate perspective and an ocean perspective so that we have closer alignment. I think 2020 gave us this great example in the Arctic, in the White Ocean, where we had these anomalous warm anomalies for the majority of the year, and this really increased the focus and the attention, not only from decision makers, but from the media around the world on the rapid changes that are occurring in the Arctic, and then the feedback mechanisms that we see. And these feedback mechanisms really need the science to disentangle these complicated and complementary impacts. Secondly, both CMEMS and C3S rely on reanalysis, and in Copernicus 2, our reanalysis era 6 will be fully coupled. So this will ensure a consistent reconstruction for the atmosphere, for land, and for the ocean, and particularly the interfaces between them. So this will make sure that we can improve the fluxes between these different domains and improve consistency. So again, sharing best practices and learning. Reanalysis is still a fairly young field, so making sure we're taking advantage of these opportunities and sharing knowledge exchange and best practices will be really useful. And then thirdly, we heard at the beginning of this session the importance of the Ocean State Report, and we also develop a climate state report. And as you've highlighted, there are so many synergies there in terms of climate impacts that are observed in the ocean and where those impacts hit society in the coastal zone. So making sure we can collaborate on that and develop really useful indicators and indices of potential decisions in the future and information for policymakers to really leverage to understand time windows, risk, vulnerability is really important. And I'll end there so the other speakers can add in as well.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And so in this line, so maybe a transition could it be, or a good tool could be this indicator. So I would like now ask Albert maybe to provide also a comment on this question on the role of science and data and services for decision making and sustainable development, although you have well covered.
Yeah, so I touched on this on the material I presented, really the importance of building the dialogue with policy processes. So I don't want to repeat myself, but maybe I'll take the opportunity to answer a question that was directed to me in the question and answers, which is about an approach for bottom-up way to design products and services. And I think sustainable development solutions really come on all scales. So some solutions will have to come on the global scale. We do need all countries to take action on mitigation for climate change, but many sustainable development solutions are related to local decisions and local adaptations. And so we need the research and developments into solutions at that level as well, But what we need on top of that is really learning and sharing mechanisms, so that the right solutions that are developed at a particular local level, and the engagement of natural scientists with social scientists with local populations can be shared, and we can learn from that processes on a greater scale.
Thank you very much. I was just checking the Q&A. So now Jean-Pierre would like to ask you the same question on the role of science data and services for decision making and sustainable development, and how reporting can support those needs. Thank you.
Well, actually, I would like to move a little bit the target. The Sustainable Developmental Goals have been addressed quite extensively, and here I would like to insist on a potential use of Copernicus data for another UN activity, and that is UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. In fact, the Paris Agreement has the potential to avoid the unmanageable, but we must be prepared to manage the unavoidable, that is the changes to which we are committed. So there is a need for adaptation as well as mitigation. And the ocean offers opportunities for both mitigation and adaptation. And yet, you know, countries ahead of COP21 in Paris had to provide nationally determined contributions, and very few included, you know, really specific mitigation and adaptation strategies related to the ocean. So I think it's the time is ripe for looking at this and also getting prepared, because so far there is no reporting to be done as far as I am aware in terms of, I mean, with respect to the UNFCCC mechanisms. But we have, if you can show the figure that I sent you, Karina, we have recently assessed several potential options for ocean-based solutions, and this is a figure from a paper published today in Frontiers in Climate, where we provide the policy clusters of several ocean-based measures. I don't go into the details here, but for all those measures, there is a need for research, because many of them, as is mentioned here, are at concept stage. Many of them will need data for implementation. Where do you do ocean fertilization experiments if you want to do that, or if you want to alkalinize the water? Where do you do that? I mean, we need data, and Copernicus Marine is well set up for that. There is also a need for ocean data for monitoring, you know, to make sure there is no unintended consequences of some of those actions. There is a need also for verification. You want to make sure that what countries report, for example, on carbon storage, is actually true, and it's not, you know, educated guesses. So I'm not fully knowledgeable on, you know, Copernicus in general products, but I can think of several Copernicus programs, marine, of course, the atmosphere, the climate change, Copernicus, and land. And I think Copernicus could perhaps be prepared when the time will come to provide the data for research, implementation, monitoring, and verification of ocean-based solutions to address climate change and its consequences. So sorry to have diverted a little bit from SDGs, but I think this is looking forward. This is potentially a topic of great interest for Copernicus Marine and other Copernicus programs.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. And this gives also a lot of piston and ideas for further discussions on the next reporting topics, and further also provide or foster demonstrating studies, as you were mentioning, that there are few ocean-related propositions in the NDCs to further foster the demonstrating of the usefulness and the existence of those solutions, and how they can be linked with the data. And I would like to come back to this. So I then have, Stefan, I would like to ask you another questions to go on the critical needs to further strengthen the linkage between service reporting activities and the environmental reporting. So what you were mentioning on my additional question I had proposed you, and you were mentioning that there's a need or a potential opportunity that data can be used by the different nations for their reporting. So how could we advance on this, and particularly in the light of the Green Deal? Which are your specific recommendations for further advancement? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to continue on this idea that I alluded to before, which is this cooperation between this close cooperation that, in my view, should be established between the provider of data, now today discussing Copernicus Marine, the provider of data, and those who need to report data to the EU. It's very important to have, I think, on a regular basis, meetings and exchange at technical level, so that countries can express their needs in terms of data, and that the data providers better understand also the policy context within which these data and products would be used. So there's a matching activity to be done between supply and demand, basically here. An example, and I was alluding to this before, and there was a question about acidification. We used to use the data from the Aloha station in Hawaii, and then we have now used the indicator that you have developed on acidification, which is a global indicator. There is a need now to downscale this indicator at regional level to take into account the regional characteristics. And by doing this, of course, there would be more relevance for countries to use it internally, and in any reporting they might want to use it into not only the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So there's a need for high resolution products which match the policy needs of countries. And of course, when we say policy needs, it's not only on the state of the environment, it's also on program of measures and monitoring programs that they are putting in place. And the regional characteristics are very important. The second element I want to highlight here is about the coherence of the monitoring and observation systems. There are quite a diversity of initiatives at global level, but also at European level. It is difficult for policymakers to understand where is the best data to use. And there is an activity here to better explain and better bring into coherence these different data sets between in-situ observation, satellite observation, and all the monitoring coming through the directives. This data is available in different platforms, in different databases. It is complex for policymakers and those helping them to understand what to use and what is available. So there is a need here to have a better coherence on the monitoring systems, but also making sure that the policymakers can understand what is available for and for what purpose. These 2 points are quite important, because only when this is established, we can really support more policymakers on what is integrated management, meaning not managing the environment separated from the economic activities at sea, but really managing the sea as one space where we need to protect the environment, but also manage in a sustainable way the maritime activities, and also helping the maritime activities to transition to sustainability. On that particular point, I want to highlight the need to involve also the private sector, obviously, which is key to the maritime activities. It's not only about the public bodies. The last point I would like to highlight here is about the European Green Deal and the different directives, different initiatives and strategies under the Green Deal. There is a number of monitoring frameworks being developed at the moment, a number of headline indicators that are being selected in order to monitor the progress in the implementation of these strategies and also monitor the progress on the state of the environment. There is a huge opportunity here as well for Copernicus to develop specific indicators that could fit into these monitoring frameworks. After all, the European Green Deal is the first priority of this commission at European level. So it's really important. I mean, I think it's a huge opportunity for visibility and for supporting further the policy process. I can separately give more details about these monitoring frameworks, but I wanted to mention them because they are going to be extremely visible in the next 5 years. I'll also close here and let others come in with their answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot of things I will come back to later, but we are running a bit of time. So, so I would then like to ask Albert Fischer, in which way could ocean reporting such as the CMEMS activity further engage in observing system recommendations and the developments, and which could be a next step to interconnect the European activities into an international framework, particularly in the light of the UN Decade and the SDG framework?
Thanks, Karina. So Goose is an integrated system focused on delivery in 3 different areas: in early warnings and forecasting, in climate, and in ocean health. And you know, part of our strategy for moving forward is really to develop some partnerships for better delivery that builds advocacy for the system, because we have better understanding and better responsiveness to end users. And that helps build the sustainability of ocean observing efforts, because the value of the observations are made more evident. So I think Copernicus Marine Service, through different types of activities, actually, both the forecasting systems, which was not the subject of this topic here in this roundtable here, but also the ocean state work and the reporting and indicators work, can be really important interfaces in developing that partnership for better delivery downstream and better understanding the needs of users downstream in policy processes and elsewhere. You asked about sort of what we can do to connect European activities into the international framework. So I mean, Europe really is a leader in developing ideas and solutions around policy processes for sustainable development. My own country, the USA, is sort of waking up from a 4-year hiatus from that. Hopefully we'll be joining you in that in the future, rejoining you in that in the future. But what you develop at the European level through the relationships and projects, for example, like the EuroSea project, that are supporting the development of a European ocean observing system, are important lessons that we can try to apply in other places around the globe. And really coming back to the idea that global action has to be made up of both a combination of global action and the sum of local action. It's important to learn from what solutions are developed in different places and around the world, and share those and try to collectively move towards better sustainable development solutions.
Thank you very much for this. Jean-Pierre, you have built up a set of policy or recommendation for ocean-based climate action. So as you have already started to show, how can your reporting activities such as CMEMS further support these pathways?
Perhaps I can take 2 examples. One of this paper I was mentioning before is looking at both mitigation and adaptation measures, and has a focus on negative emissions. One of those negative emissions measure is ocean alkalinity enhancement, whereby one uses alkaline rocks to dissolve in the ocean in order to combat ocean acidification, and also to stimulate CO2 uptake. So data provided by Copernicus Marine will be essential. This is a concept stage measure. There is no attempt to do in situ implementation. But when pilot experiments will be made, it will be critical to decide where to do that. And there are arguments suggesting that upwelling areas would be a good place to do that, to favor this solution. There is also a need for monitoring where the carbon goes, and so there is a clear link with the atmosphere Copernicus, and also to monitor unintended consequences, making sure that, for example, there is no issues on primary productions by monitoring chlorophyll concentrations, for example. So this is quite critical also for reporting, because if a country, it can be done in the coastal zone as well, on beaches, for example, distributing these alkaline rocks on, in the very nearshore environments. And if reporting needs to be done, you want to verify that the carbon is actually stored and in the quantity indicated by the country from where the data come from. So that's one example of a key need for verification, monitoring and reporting. Another example is one of those measures that we looked at is the restoration and enhancement of coastal vegetation, so-called blue carbon ecosystems, mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrass meadows. So where is there a chance to enhance those ecosystems? What is the growth of those ecosystems, the trees? I know that mangroves can be also monitored in terms of the carbon storage in the forest. How much carbon is added every year? Is it sustainable in the long term? And how much of this carbon is actually stored? So those are questions for which Copernicus can provide data. And as I said earlier, I'm not sure whether there is a mechanism to do that, but several Copernicus programs need to be brought together to do this kind of work. I mean, clearly there you will need to have the land Copernicus also involved, and probably the atmosphere Copernicus also involved. So those are, Marie-Laure Grégoire in her presentation also discussed the wind farms, and this is the only ocean-based measure that we qualified as decisive in our clustering of ocean-based measures. So where do you put them? And this, Marie-Laure has shown a very nice example in the Belgian coastal zone. So I think there is a great potential for Copernicus to be well positioned in this area of reporting as part of the UNFCCC mechanism. The next step will be in November this year, COP26, which will take place in Scotland. And hopefully, I mean, the countries have to provide the new NDCs before then, and hopefully the ocean will be more visible in their contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we had started 3 minutes overtime, so I would like to have 3 minutes overtime, and I would like to get the chance to get the opinion from Samantha and to ask the question: in the light of climate change, the ocean plays a critical role, and many of the climate change indicators are discussed, for example, in IPCC, are ocean related. So those include, for example, ocean warming, ocean acidification, sea level rise, sea surface temperature, many we have to discuss today. Which are the major pathways for interaction between the two service components, and which are the recommendations for future refinements?
Sure. So I touched on a couple of those in my previous answer, how we can look to synergies when we're looking at essential variables for both the ocean and for climate. how we're looking at knowledge exchange for improving the next generation of reanalysis, and I guess also understanding the user experience as well. So from the Copernicus Climate Change Service, we have the Climate Data Store that has approximately 70,000 users on it. Within those 70,000 users, there's a lot of users that interact with the marine environment, that are either interested in wind energy or in extremes for storm surges, tides, etc., etc. So making sure we can have a common approach across Copernicus services is really critical to improve that user experience. And I guess a really good example of this is the C3S has partnered with the European Environment Agency on their Climate Adapt portal. So the C3S data inputs into the EEA's Climate Adapt portal. And this enables countries, municipalities around Europe to understand climate information to build into their adaptation plans. And following on from Jean-Pierre's comments as well, there's obviously the global stocktake for the UNFCCC in 2023, and there's the new CO2 service coming online, which will be hosted by the Atmospheric Monitoring Service. So there, as you mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities for the Copernicus services to collectively tackle the greatest crisis that we're facing, and enable data and knowledge and information to be in the hands of decision makers.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And so I would like to thank all the panel members and then the speakers for their contribution to this very interesting session. And I have many points. I will come back to you for several issues. I just will give some 3 final key points taking out as our message, which does not reflect everything we have discussed today. But what I get out here from this discussion is that one way for us also to assure that we establish a long-term dialogue at the science policy and the science private sector, and nourishes with knowledge, with science data and services to build partnerships. So as you just mentioned, Albert, for global action and is a sum of local action, so that we assure that the data are also used, and also as mentioned at European level from Stefan, to further improve the possibility that those can be used also for the relational reporting activities. Then to build on the specific measures and also for targeted approaches, such as the example given for the blue carbon, for example, and this can be established best through a common co-working within the service, with all the services, but also in general to put all our forces together in order to achieve the future we want. The ocean as a motto for the UN Decade of Sustainable Development. So with this, again, I would like to thank you, and I would like hereby close this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Karina, and thank you for all the panelists for this final roundtable. It has been a long day, and there was a lot of interesting and stimulating discussion and presentation. So I would like, on behalf of all the Mercator Ocean teams, to thank all speakers and all panelists for this very interesting day. Also, thanks to all the CMEMS teams that actively worked together with Mercator Ocean communication teams to set up this interactive session. I think it's time now for all of you to take some rest and be ready tomorrow to join us again at 9 sharp. We have, I think, a very interesting day tomorrow with a discussion in particular on the user uptake, but also 2 interactive sessions tomorrow that you can see here on the screen. So please join us at 9 tomorrow and be ready to interact with us again. And thanks to all of you for your active participation today. See you tomorrow.